back in gear here in just a minute.
So we're at 6C right now?
Do what?
See,
We're gonna be at 6C?
6D.
Oh, 6D, okay.
6C was getting us back into regular.
get back, yeah.
Okay, we'll now move to item 6D, which is discuss, consider, and act upon matters discussed in closed session related to filling vacancy for unexpired term for City Council Member District 1, which expires May 2021. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept Larry May as a candidate for city councilman.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Larry May. Okay, we'll now move to item 6E, which is discuss, consider, and act upon authorizing city staff to receive bids for Oak Creek Lake lots numbers 468 and 509, which were returned to the city for non-payment of the annual lake lease.
Mayor, Council, that's lot excuse me, sorry about that, 468 right there, just FYI, and lot 509. These are the two that we're talking about this morning.
Kind of shapes that house in, isn't it? About to fall down.
About to fall down, see? Yep.
That's the reason they gave it back, huh?
There you go.
Move we authorize staff to go out for bids on these two lake lots.
Now, second. Second motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's approved. Okay. We'll now move to item 6F, which is discuss, consider, and act upon appointment of Mr. Gil Cherry, who is currently serving as an alternate member to a regular member, and appointing of Mr. Jeremy Wilkes as an alternate member for the Planning and Zoning Commission. Dana? Did he leave? Y'all have any questions on it, or?
I would assume, and we may need Dana to answer that both these individuals have agreed to serve.
That is correct, yes, sir.
Yeah.
I would move we make these appointments.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. We'll now move to item 6G, which is discuss, consider, and act upon final acceptance of the elevated storage tank project completed by Landmark Structures, contingent upon funding agency approval. Mr. Sage.
Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Mayor, Council. Good to see everybody. For the record, my name is Sage Diller with Improtech Hibbs and Todd. This is the first council I've attended in a little while, given all of the virus going on. So I'm glad to be here and glad to finally kind of get dressed back up one more time. So anyway, so I have provided you with a handout there, which is my letter of recommendation of project acceptance for this elevated storage tank project. It is funded by the Texas Water Development Board, so there will be a closeout process with them. The contractor, Landmark Structures, has provided the closeout documents. They're attached to my letter of recommendation, but I'll just read kind of the first part there. To the best of my knowledge, information, belief, the reference project is complete in accordance with the approved contract documents, drawings, technical specs, and change orders. The date of substantial completion is September 5th, 2019. That was when the tank was actually filled. The contractor warranties the work for a period of 1 year from that date. The contractor has provided the closeout documents outlined in section 1700 of the contract documents. So at this point in time, and in accordance with the contract documents, the final project acceptance and release of retainage funds is recommended at this time. If you'll notice, one of the closeout documents provided is the final pay request provided by the contractor. Now, I will note there are a couple of small items that I'm going to make the contractor revise on this pay request. There's some minor things that don't add up quite right. It's not a big issue. The city will only pay what is contracted, but that is part of the closeout process with the Water Development Board, and we'll get that all squared away and rectified. And then also attached are the contractor's affidavit of bills paid, release of liens, and warranty statement. So with that, our recommendation at this point in time is to approve acceptance and release of the final retainage. Any questions?
So the tower's up and running and we haven't had any problems with it?
No, sir.
That's great.
Have you seen it at night?
It looks,
It
Looks
really
good,
looks
doesn't it?
nice.
Like, it shines.
Mm-hmm.
everybody's made favorable comments about that.
It's good.
Well, with that being said, I'll make a motion, we accept the, recommendation and payments to close it all up.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Thank you, sir.
Sir?
We'll now move to item 6H, which is discuss, consider, and act upon a resolution accepting Sweetwater Enterprise for Economic Development Municipal Development District's donation of park improvements to the city of Sweetwater. Any questions?
Move adoption of the resolution.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried and approved. Now read the resolution of the record. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Sweetwater, Texas, accepting and approving certain park improvements funds by the Sweetwater Municipal Development District and establishing an effective date. Now move to item 6I, which is discuss, consider, and act upon naming of the splash pad located at Newman Park.
This is the fun one, so we'll have some fun with it.
We got a list of about 25 here, so we'll probably make everybody mad.
I would like to add 2 more.
Oh.
Let's make it 27. Mustang Harbor Splash Pad or Sweetwater Harbor Splash Pad. And I would suggest that the city manager appoint a committee of staff to make a final decision, because we'll be here all day.
I appoint the 5 of y'all right here. There you go.
Oh, no.
We can do that, sir, and then bring it back in July.
Or at least narrow it down to 2 or 3.
We'll give you 2 or 3
Yeah,
options.
yeah.
Very good. And we can work with the MDD on that.
Good idea.
Throw it back on somebody else.
Misha? Oh, yeah, they just gave it to us.
We'll bring donuts or something. I don't know.
Okay, so, and that's in the form of a motion?
Well, just a suggestion or a directive, or does it need to be a motion?
Well, what's on the agenda is a resolution naming the splash pad, so it's a completely different, what's on the agenda is a completely different thing, but a directive
Okay,
to the city
I'm
manager.
gonna move we table
Yes.
the resolution and refer the matter back to staff for a narrowing down of the
Yes, sir.
potential names.
Yes, sir. We can do that.
So you have a motion to table.
Second.
Second?
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we're not gonna do the next one then. Okay, we'll now move to item 6J, which is discuss, consider, and act upon a resolution amending page 23 of the central rate schedule section. 3, miscellaneous fees and revenues, paragraph 1, lake lot inspection fee, number 1, locating boundaries.
If you have any questions for Eddie or Patty, I'm sure they'd be glad to answer them.
It's going from 25 to 75, correct? And it cost you more than that to go out there.
Oh, yeah.
Sir? Any questions?
And this is just for inspection of property lines related to transfer of ownership or improvements that somebody might wanna make?
Yes, sir, what happens, Dr. Peak, when somebody wants to build something or put up a fence or something like that, they need the boundaries marked so that they can maintain the 15-foot separation from the easement. So we have to go out and mark boundaries, and it usually takes about 3 people to do that. You say it's an hour's drive out there, and a minimum of 1 hour's worth of labor could do, and it's not always easy with the map we have. It's pretty time consuming.
Move we adopt the amendment to the central rate schedule.
Thank you.
I got a second.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's approved. Now read the resolution into the record. Amending, confirming, and ratifying the central rate schedule for the various fees, license permits, and rate charges by the city of Sweetwater, Texas for the fiscal year 2020, and adopting such central rate schedule. City manager's report.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are several items that I'd like to quickly discuss this morning. And you see those up there. I'll go over them one by one. On the water infrastructure improvement, and Eddie, you might want to help me on this, or Sage, please feel free to come up and explain to us what's going on here.
Sure, as you know, there's ongoing Texas Water Development Board project, which is installing and replacing water lines in the system. It was identified, there's about 2 blocks there that had a section of cast iron line that was installed. So the Water Development Board project is on that west side, and there's existing good PVC on the east side. And so it was identified, it just makes sense to go ahead and have that section replaced, take the cast iron out and replace it with PVC. That's 10-inch PVC that will be going in. We received a favorable bid from a contractor. Price was $48,000 and a little bit of change. And that project was recommended to be done, and that'll be taking place. That way, all of that water line in that area will now be new PVC. So that's a good addition to the system.
Thank you, sir. The Sparks in the Park coming up on Saturday, July 4th at Newman Park at dark, which is about 9:30 p.m.-ish is what Karen put up there. She wanted me to say a few words about the fundraising efforts that they've been undertaking. Let's see here. She wanted to update us that the fundraising efforts have gone extremely well, and the Chamber is very appreciative of the community's tremendous support of the event. She wasn't sure whether people were going to be able to be generous or not, but it turned out that they have. And so she wants to thank the community for their support and their sponsorship of this great event. So again, that's on Saturday, July 4th at Newman Park about 9:30 p.m. So we're looking forward to that. The bait shop update. Russell, you have a few words you want to tell us about that?
Update on the bait shop, as you know, the last proposal that we got kind of backed out. So we do have a couple of others that have come in that we're reviewing right now. Just wanted to go over some of the improvements and kind of the repairs and updates that we've done so far. We've done, in the building itself, is 2 new air conditioned heat split units. We put in, as you see there in the picture, the back exit door, the screen doors. And we've got a new back door we put in for the bait room. We've got repairs that we've done for the water and the sewer, and we've had to do some electrical repairs in there. And we've got new LED lights that we put on the inside of the building. So building should be ready to go. There's a few other little updates, like as you can kind of see, painting the outside of the building we'll do, and a little bit of painting on the inside of the building. I think that's about what we've done so far.
And we've got one proposal that's come in that we're currently reviewing, and possibly another one that might come in as well.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, do have one proposal and waiting on the other to see if they're going to provide a proposal for us.
Yes. Okay. So we're a little closer to that. So thank you and your crews for everything you've done to get that base shop ready to go.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Police department update. Our current chief of police, Brian Frieda, is leaving us for what he thinks are greener pastures, but we all know better than that, don't we? And we're gonna celebrate before he leaves, because like I told you, with every employee that leaves, you either celebrate before they leave or you celebrate after they're gone, right? With you, it's gonna be before, because you've earned it, on Friday, June 26th, from 4 p.m. to 5:30, here in this council chambers at the City Hall. And we want to recognize you, Brian, and your family for your 8 years of dedicated and loyal service to the city of Sweetwater. And we hate to see you go, but we're happy for you. It's bittersweet. It's bittersweet, speaking for the staff. So we hope everybody can come out here. It's kind of a come and go type event, and wish Chief Frieda, soon to be City Manager Frieda, wish him well in his next endeavor. And I would also like to, while we're at it, announce publicly that Lieutenant Matt Counts is now our interim police chief, while we search for go through the process to search for a new police chief. So Matt, I want to thank you. We've met this week a couple of times already, and we're going on getting things just, going down the path. So I appreciate you and your professionalism and your leadership and your willingness to step up into that interim police chief role. I know it isn't easy, especially now. You and I just talked about, something already that could come up on Friday. So welcome to the job, and we're glad to have you here. And then one more thing, the splash pad update. Russell, thumbs up, we're good to go?
We're good to go.
All right, what I want to announce right now on the splash pad is that we are opening it up today at noon for the public. We'll get that out on Facebook, we'll get that out on our social media, our Instagram, our Twitter, word of mouth, hopefully. Text your friends, text your family. It's opening up at noon today. We're just very appreciative. So it's a soft opening. We'll have a grand opening that we'll work with the MDD on to make sure that their board is there, their staff is there, that everybody here is there, much as very similar to what we did with the dog park opening, making it a community event, community-wide event. Maybe we can grill hot dogs or have food trucks out there and radio station live remote, those kinds of things. Very similar to what we did with the dog park grand opening. But we're ready for this thing to be open, aren't we, Ken?
Yes, sir.
Very much so. And so that will happen today in approximately an hour and 45 minutes or so. We're just gonna turn the spigot on and go.
Yes, sir.
And go. So that's what we're gonna do. It's time for this. This is a great community amenity. I think the families are gonna love it, the kids especially. And like I said, we'll work on a grand opening in the next several weekends to come, probably a Saturday morning, something like that. I remember when I was in Abilene and we opened our first splash pad at Nelson Park by the zoo. It was, we had the soft opening, but for the grand opening, it was on a Saturday morning, and the mayor and a bunch of kids surrounded him, and he stood under that bucket right there and they took the first bucket, the first official bucket. So Mayor, you might want to get ready for that, or if you have alternate plans, you can let us know about that. You know, have a
Mayor Pro Tem will be there.
have a
He's
stand.
already bought a new Speedo. just for that.
You're busy that day. So we'll do something real special for everybody on the grand opening, and thank everybody we need to thank, especially the MBD, especially the council. Those boards worked very well together to one, and get it funded, and two, to get it built, and Russell and his crews, and Eddie and his crews, and Patty on the finance side, everybody that was involved. And I know I'm leaving out a lot of names, but we'll get those straight for the grand opening and announce those, because there was Ken and Misha, and you know, there's just so many people that put a lot of time and effort into this great project that you'll see here open up today here in a little bit. So it's a very proud day here in Sweetwater. We'll get that on social media as soon as we're done with this meeting, and we'll see who shows up. Everybody's invited, and it's free. There we go. And Mr. Mayor, that is all I had.
All right, we're gonna move to item 8B, which is the water and street presentation from Mr. Sage.
Yes, sir. No.
I believe council has copies of this. Okay, good. I brought a few extra if needed. All right, so we'll start with the utility system update. First, I'd like to say good job, Mr. Vela, on your presentation. It was very clear and concise. And bad news is my presentations aren't going to be that good. So we'll see how this goes. So we're going to touch on a few of the items. This is very similar to presentations we've done in the past on the utility system. You know, the utility system is a business, and there are costs and ongoing maintenance items you have to do, and money that you have to invest in the system, and we're going to touch on some of those right here. One thing, when we were looking at earlier the utility rates as compared to other cities, one thing to keep in mind, the condition of the other comparable cities. What is their system in? Have they invested in projects to update their system? Are they paying debt service like the city of Sweetwater and keeping their system up to where it needs to be? That's just, you know, sometimes you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples on some of that. So here's the agenda that we'll run through. The groundwater from the city wells, the surface water conditions, and what's being done to protect those. The current ongoing projects that are wrapping up, and then also the projects that we've talked about that were mentioned earlier, some of the Water Development Board bond projects that will be upcoming. So here's a summary of the usage over the last year. As you can see there, total water usage averaged about 1.97 million gallons a day. About 75% of that came from the groundwater wells. And then also the remaining 24.5% came from Oak Creek Lake. That's about 0.48 million gallons a day. We've been blessed with an abundance of surface water, and utilizing that water while it's available is the recommended strategy, and it supports the additional replacement of the remaining train there at 2 trains at the water treatment plant, which is going to be one of the upcoming projects that the city is looking at pursuing. And if there's any questions along this, please let me know. Here's the average changes in the well field. As you know, the city staff keeps a very tight record of water levels throughout the well fields. And over the past 3 years, there's only been a 0.1 foot drop in those levels when you average it over the different fields. So that's a good feeling, knowing that the groundwater is maintaining its static levels, and it's always there as a good resource. And the city, it takes a conjunctive approach, utilizing water, groundwater and surface water. And while the available surface water is there, the city staff will be looking at utilizing that as appropriate. Status of water supplies. Here are the rain gauges across the system over the years and as of June of this year. And one item there on the right side is the percentage of capacity of the lakes in the system. As you can see there, Oak Creek Lakes at 91.4%. That's a little down from 2019, but over 90%. That's a great condition to be in. Back in 2018, it was a little different scenario. Some pictures there showing the changes in 2019 and 2020. Once again, in 2019, we were in a very saturated condition, but still, even in 2020, over 90% is a great condition to be in. That's showing when the Oak Creek caught so much water back in 2018. And then a photo from the same position showing in 19 it was 1 foot 3¼ inches below the spillway and 5.9 inches above the spillway in 2019 there at Oak Creek. So not a really big change visually, and not a big change from a percentage wise. So I mentioned what the city staff does in an ongoing manner to protect the water supplies. Obviously, fixing leaks throughout the system. We don't want to pump water from the lake or from the wells, treat it, and then pump it out in distribution and have continual leaks. But you look at all of the buried infrastructure out there through the system, and that is an ongoing challenge for city staff, and they're doing a great job of trying to address that and improve the leak percentage rate. In 2019 calendar year, 124 meters were tested and 521 meters were replaced by city crews. As you know, it is important to have accurate billing. Cities, the meters over time lose their percentage of accuracy, and so that's important to replace those. We want to make sure that the city is getting compensated for the product that is going out into the system and being sold to customers, and not overbilling, but having accurate meters is a big part of that. The water loss audit, it's continuing to improve with the water line replacement projects and the meter replacement projects that are being done. That's just a big part of that ongoing investment in the city's infrastructure that's being accomplished. So preventative maintenance costs money to maintain. It's just like any piece of equipment, a vehicle. You have to continually put money into it, or it's going to get to a point where you're going to have to fully replace it. That goes on with the pump and motor maintenance out in the system. The wellhead rehab, it was mentioned, the city invests money annually in maintaining those wells and replacing pumps, replacing wiring as needed, addressing casing condition in the system or in the wells themselves. There's facilities and maintenance, there's membrane maintenance, and then there's optimization efforts. The city staff wants to be as efficient as they can with the assets or the infrastructure that are in place. And so that includes membrane cleaning, chemical usage. It was mentioned earlier, the cost of chemicals. It's ongoing that the city staff is looking at ways of being efficient with the usage of those chemicals, and that avoids costly overfeed of coagulant preservatives, preserves membrane health. So current projects that are ongoing, obviously the water well rehab, that's an ongoing process that is an annual projects that the city takes on. The projects that are being ongoing right now that are funded by the Water Development are the SCADA Improvements Project. That project, I would say, is probably 30% complete, somewhere right in there. That's being completed by Dedicated Controls. They're putting up SCADA towers, RTUs, antennas, And that way, there's going to be a good communication and reporting out in the distribution, well-filled, and it goes back to the HMI at the water treatment plant. So that's going to be a huge improvement for city staff and operators on maintaining and operating that system efficiently. The elevated storage tank project, as we said, we're closing that out with the Water Development Board. And then there's a water line replacement project that's ongoing. And that project is probably about 75% complete, something like that. And that is going well. The projects that have been, well, we've talked about that. That's kind of a repeat of the ongoing projects there. A little bit more information on the well field improvement project. It just maintains that database of the existing information, which allows comparison of the baseline data of the initial well field. So over time, your static levels may increase or may decrease, but you want to look at the performance of those wells, individual wells and well field as a whole. If you see a well that is not producing as much as it has in the past, because you look at your records, you compare that, that's a great time to go in there and rehab it, maybe acidize the casing, open up some of those fissures, allow the water to come in more efficiently, and then maintain the health of that well. So that's earlier in the budget presentation, it was mentioned the $75,000 that's being invested in the rehab and maintenance of the well field. That's listed there at the bottom. There's some of the process that's done: chemical treatment, mechanical cleaning, pump motor replacement, flow meters when necessary, and electrical repairs. Hydraulic modeling of the well field, that's the data that's in the data logs that are kept by city staff and is constantly monitored. The SCADA system that's being updated, that's funded by the Water Development Board, is the project I mentioned. And that's shown there as well. SCADA system improvements, total project $957,925 by Dedicated Controls, and that's a project that'll be completed in the next several months. One thing to keep in mind is SCADA system, just like any computer system, technology is always advancing. That's one reason we're replacing a lot of the outdated equipment now with a newer, updated SCADA system. One thing to keep in mind, those radios need to be looked at maybe every 10 to 12 years, maybe for replacement. Technology is just ongoing cost that we got to consider. But once this current project is installed, it'll be a huge improvement over over the outdated system that's there now. The water storage tank, the utilization of the pressure reducing valves, that has been in place for some time now and operating correctly. As we all know, the pros is reducing some of the historically high pressures on the north side. That will lead, has led to reduced number of leaks over there, which just takes pressure over some of that, takes pressure off some of the aging system. Obviously, as I think we talked about in some council meetings, some of the customers that have historically had high pressures now have a little bit lower, and it'll be noticeable, but it's within normal ranges. When they have been higher, now they're down to normal pressure ranges, and that's just something that's a little bit of education over time. Part of this process, there was a installation of a VFD, which we talked about earlier, the variable frequency drive on the high service pump motor number 5. That's the big workhorse motor or pump over there at the water plant that puts water out into the distribution system. One thing that has been installed and utilized, it's really neat with that variable frequency drive, the VFD, that large pump can kind of float on how much water that it sends out into the system. So it's reading the elevated storage tank, and as that water level gets down to a certain level, it'll start kicking on, and then if demand is pulling water out, that pump can ramp up and send more water out, or it can slow down, and it just kind of rides that wave from the demand on the system. It's really neat how that's working. mentioned the final installation, the performance testing, demolition of the old tank, that's been done. The new tank was filled in September 5th of 19. Old tank came down in November 12 of 2019. And then there's the photo at night that we mentioned, and it does look nice. Membrane replacement, if you will recall, one of the phases funded by the Water Development Board was to replace 2 trains at the water treatment plant, which was 4 MGD. They began operating in September of 2017, and then we worked through the final compliance testing and got those approved and online. Everything's working well with those. As far as I know, everything's really good. I think the staff got used to some of the older membranes, and you know, those fibers get to where they frequently break. That's a lot of O&M and a lot of maintenance time. Now you get a set of better upgraded membranes, and it's a huge improvement. So with that, the next round of Water Development Board funding that the city will be looking at pursuing is replacing the remaining 2 trains, the remaining 4 MGD of membranes, and that cost is about $1.5 million, I think, estimated right now. There will be TCEQ testing associated with that, and then obviously the TCEQ has inspections that they will have to do as well. So currently under construction, there's about $1.5 million of Water Development Board funded projects. We talked about the SCADA, and then the water line replacement is ongoing. So there's about 6,500 linear feet under contract D that's going to be completed here in the next couple of months. It's been ongoing for some time, but that project is going well. So future projects that has been discussed about being funded through the Water Development Board. Water Development Board still maintains to be a good, cost-effective option for city-funded projects. There's some other smaller ones, the CDBG, which is a grant program. We completed one of those projects last year. There's some other ones out there, but with the discounted interest rates that the Water Development Board can offer, it is still probably, you know, the best financial vehicle to finance these water and sewer projects. We have a little bit of frustration. We have to deal with some of the hurdles with dealing with the funding agencies. There's a lot of reporting that goes through. There's pay requests have to be approved, and then there's sometimes tends to be a bottleneck. But from a financial standpoint, it still maintains to be a very good option for the city. So as mentioned, looking at the water side improvements, there's about $3.2 million that have been identified. That's membrane replacement, additional water line replacement, ground storage tank rehab at the water treatment plant, and then some pump replacements. At the wastewater treatment plant, a couple of $1 million, or about $2.5 million have been identified if you look at those together. At the water treatment plant, repairs for equipment. We completed a wastewater treatment plant evaluation, and that's in the next couple of slides, back in, I believe, in 17. They went through and evaluated a condition, made a list of different pieces of equipment that were recommended for replacement, and now here comes the financing vehicle to get those done, which would be through the Texas Water Development Board bond project. Those improvements that were identified are listed there. Also, there's some wastewater collection system improvements that have been identified, around $500,000 or so for those, and those are listed there. So the evaluation that I mentioned was back in 2017. That went through a pretty comprehensive evaluation of the plant and came up with some recommended improvements. Those are listed there as part of that proposed Water Development Board bond project. Separate item, standalone item there, the wastewater irrigation out at the city farm. That is compiled of 1950s piping. That's probably exceeding its intended service life, and that's something that's been identified for potential funding option in the future. estimated cost there right now around 900 to 1.2 million for replacement, including individual runs to the pivots. There's a kind of a simple sketch there showing those. One item I need to bring up, just because we're talking about budget and ongoing cost, is water and wastewater operators. They are getting to be fewer and fewer available, and anytime you guys can get good quality operators, I know it's always a challenge to hang on to them, and especially in a competitive job market. You gotta be competitive with benefits and compensation and all that. And I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know. It's just it's an ongoing challenge for cities across the state and elsewhere just to keep those guys in those positions and keep them trained. There's a lot of training that goes on that's required by the state. You see there 2 to 3 years for a C license, and you need that to operate plants without supervision, and 3 to 5 years for a B license. At the water plant, it's mandatory to have 1. It's preferable to have 2. And then at the wastewater plant, mandatory to have 2 operators. A couple of items there about the incentives and being competitive. It's always a challenge when you have other industries that are kind of trying to not steal employees, I don't want to say that, but are competing for employees. So that's just something to keep in mind. So we all know that's a challenge, and it's just it's tough to stay competitive, but it's something you got to do. Future water supplies. This slide is very similar to what we talked about last year. The city's doing a great job with the well field. You need to be thinking, long term about other well field options, maybe securing some additional land, just looking at things that may come available, and what those costs may be. There's regional discussion in the West Texas Partnership about some of the larger cities out in this region. That's common when you're talking about regional projects. Some of the larger cities taking the lead on that. That's ongoing in discussions for water supplies out in this part of the state. Obviously, the city of Sweetwater would be, in that mix in a long-term scenario. Brackish groundwater. There's the Water Development Board funding some projects to map some of the groundwater, the brackish water that's down deep across the state, and there's an ocean down there. It's just high in salts, and it needs to be treated. So treatment has a cost. There's technology advancements every day, which are bringing those costs down. And I think long term, that's probably one of the alternatives that is highly ranked across the state, is utilizing some of that brackish groundwater. As technology increases, it improves, and the efficiency increases. Maybe those costs come down, but that's it's a blessing maybe that the water is there. It's a challenge that it's not in very good condition, but it's also a positive that eventually, the cost will come down, and maybe that'll be cost effective to treat it. The regional water plan is ongoing. And Sweetwater's identified as having water supply needs met in conjunction with the city of Abilene in that overall regional plan. That's really all I have at this point. Any questions? No? All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
You got one more on streets, is that right?
One on the streets.
Okay, the street evaluation, if you'll recall, the city took that on a couple of years ago, and we'll do a little summary of where that stands. So in 2018, pavement evaluation was completed, and I'll switch over. I think it's on the next slide, or 2 slides. Shows an overall map of where the streets were evaluated. There's some of the major thoroughfares through town that a lot of the local traffic utilizes. That was reviewed in that evaluation. Try to do somewhat of a priority ranking based upon usage of, and where could the city invest money on street improvements that would be most utilized by the traveling public. That was mentioned in that report, and that still needs to be categorized and ranked. As we know, streets are expensive. They are expensive, and you know, the people that use them don't pay tolls. You don't pay money to utilize them. So the city, it's an investment, and it's for the traveling public. It's for the best of the citizens, but it is expensive to fund on something that doesn't, you know, and directly pay you back. I guess it pays you back for folks getting and conducting business and getting where they need to go. But they are something that is an ongoing maintenance and is a high in installation cost. Anyway, so summary of that pavement evaluation that was done. Some of the ride quality was evaluated, and the utilities that were under those. Some recommendations were made on cost. There's about 15 and a half miles of city streets. The utilities under those were identified as well, and then the costs were generated. There's the map. It's a little hard to read some of the streets, but it's a big percentage of the overall major thoroughfares through town. So one limitation of that first phase is we didn't know much about the quality of the material that was there. How much of that base material could be reused to reduce cost? So we recommended in that evaluation the next phase is to refine the project cost by looking at the traffic and looking at the subsurface investigation. So in phase 2, all those dots, there were geotechnical bores taken to identify what the material there was and what, fingers crossed there was good crushed limestone flex base under the roadway that could be reused and then resurfaced that would save cost. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Right there is a summary of some of the bores that were taken, and as you'll see, the base underneath the roadways is a pit run base. It's just local sources that were around that were utilized back when those streets were installed or constructed. It's not uncommon. It's seen all the time. When the streets were constructed, you go find the closest source, you utilize it, you put it in place, you haul it over there, you compact it, and then you pave it. So that's what the city has been driving on these streets for many, many years now. So our recommendation, if you're going to go back and invest this type of money in a new street section, you're going to bring in good crushed limestone base, because that's, you build the roadway from the ground up, right, from the base up, and we need to have good material to do so. Now, the downside to that is that's an added cost. I mean, but you want to put a good product in. You don't want to go pave over, less than desirable roadway material. And I'm not saying that roadways can't be constructed of this locally sourced pit run material, but if you're looking at a roadway that's going to last decades and decades, 40 years, 50 years, whatever, we want to start with good material, and recommendation would be basically TxDOT type material, which is a limestone crushed base. So we revised the cost, we updated the cost based upon the information we found, and based on those roadways, right now we're looking around, $24 million. That's a chunk of money. It is. But like we said, streets and roadways are expensive. Construction is expensive. Unfortunately, they're not getting any cheaper. There's a construction cost percentage increase every year. There's some years it's not so much, but for budgeting sake, we typically look at 3 to 5% construction cost per year. So there are ways of handling or approaching a large project like that you can break it up into phases, something that is more manageable and do it over numerous years. There's different ways. This is a challenge that every city faces. Streets are expensive, but you gotta continually invest in that infrastructure, and at some point, you need to replace them. So, I know that's a large number, but for y'all's planning and budgeting sake, that's what you need to be kinda looking at as for cost if we wanna address a project like that. I think that's all I had. Any questions on that?
I'd just make some comments. Thank you, Sage,
Yes, sir.
for being here today and going over these important issues with us. They are very important. Like I said during my presentation, we're in good shape on the water side. Financially, we've got things worked out. We've been doing water projects. I mean, you've been replacing lines, Eddie, forever. I mean, that's what you need to do on the water side. It's also what you need to do on the street side. It's just that we haven't been doing that like we have on the water side because primarily because of the cost, I would imagine. Now, we do the seal coat project once a year. We've skipped it once or twice because of budgetary concerns and reasons. But that seal coat, we all know, is a Band-Aid. We need to get into our streets and do partial depth, if not full depth, reconstructions on those. Get down to the base material and replace it, like Sage said, with crushed limestone, something that's going to last over the decades. And so in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the council that's here, the city manager that's here, the engineers, everybody, the staff that's here isn't wondering, why didn't those folks 20, 30 years ago do what they needed to do? Why are we still dealing with this issue? We've got to get started on it. We've got to get started on it. And in my mind, this is the most important project that we'll be facing in the years to come. That's why I kept going back in my presentation on the property tax rate. The capacity's there. We're in the bottom quarter of our peer cities. We haven't gone up from the 48 except just, in the last year. We've been at the 48 cents prior to that for a long time, Patty. And forever. And we have no, none of those, none of that rate is allocated to the interest and sinking side, to the debt side. So we have zero on the debt side for the tax rate. It's all on the maintenance and operations side. That all being said, I would strongly encourage this council to really consider moving forward and looking at and studying perhaps a certificate of obligation to start a CO, which does not require voter approval for maybe phase one of these streets. And the reason I say that is because if we take it to the voters and they vote it down, it doesn't mean that we're done. We still got to find a way to do the streets, whether they would vote it up or down or not. A CO would allow this council to make that decision based on the facts and based on the engineering reports that we're getting from Mr. Diller and EHT. There's no doubt that they need to be done. And by going the CO route, and it's just a suggestion, we can avoid the political part of it for phase one and show the community what needs to be done and what can be done if you throw some money at the streets, and what the difference is between what we have on the ground now and what would ultimately be the new section of roadways that they be traveling on. It would be night and day. And I would suggest starting off with a few streets throughout town on the north and south side, just to show and demonstrate what can be done with a little bit of money. And then prepare a more comprehensive and probably more expensive phase 2, 3, and 4 over the next several years, and go to the voters on that and say, okay, now that you've seen what can be done with the $4 or $5 million, this is what can be done with 10 or 7 or 8 or 12 or whatever we decide at that time. So, but I guess my point is it needs to be done. We can't just do the Band-Aid and then let TxDOT do all the state roadways and be okay with that, because the roadways we're responsible for are in very, very, very bad condition. And they're not going to get any better over time, are they, Sage? They're just going to get worse. And rain and water getting into those cracks and getting down into the base material is the biggest enemy of streets. So we need to make sure that those are sealed, the base material is good, the subsurface is good, and that they're driving on something good and safe, because that's how our kids get to school, that's how the buses, take the kids to school, that's how we all get to work, that's how the ambulances transport patients to the hospital. It's over the roadways. And we just gotta make a commitment as a council, as a staff, as a community, to make sure that this gets done, and see it all the way through. And I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's what I wanted to say, about our streets and their condition. So thank you.
Thank y'all. Motion for adjournment.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Are you seconding it? Aaron? All right. All in favor?
Aye.